Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Chuck Drawbaugh with College Funding Associates. Thank you for joining us tonight on this webinar to talk about college. We're going to talk about some secrets to save time and money and reduce stress and help you understand all about financial aid, scholarships, loans, and the forms and everything else that you might be wondering about, whether you have a freshman in high school, a junior in high school, anybody that has a kid that's getting ready to go off to college. This is something that we're trying to help everybody have a little bit more knowledge as they move forward through the process. And I'm fairly certain that everyone will walk away from this tonight knowing something, at least one thing new that they didn't know when they came on in the beginning. So we call this program The Secrets to Save Time and Money and Reduce Stress. And again, part of the financial aid process is identifying what the family's out-of-pocket cost might be much earlier on than most people actually learn what those key statistics and numbers are. For some people, they may be able to legally arrange their finances before they apply for aid so that they can qualify for more aid and get more help and pay less out of their pocket. Before we got started, I had a couple of pictures up addressing the scandal of the time. And one thing I can assure everybody is, if somebody is guaranteeing you a specific amount of money or guaranteeing you that you're going to get your kid into a specific college, odds are extremely high that it is a scam, and you should probably not walk but run the other way. So a little comment there based on current events, and now we'll get into our program here. So, couple of quick headlines. I'm sure everybody's seen. There's plenty of headlines talking about college in general, the scandal, but a lot of the headlines over the last year tend to be about how much debt there is associated with college. So naturally, we want to do our best to make sure that although we may have to borrow some money for college, we want to keep that to a minimum for ourselves as parents as well as for our students. A little bit about ourselves. My name again is Chuck Drawbaugh. Our company is College Funding Associates. We have two offices in Monmouth County, Manasquan and Rumson. And that's about all I'm going to spend time on talking about myself, because this presentation is about getting all of you the information that you want so that you're better prepared as you move forward. All right. These are some additional statistics that we often will have up on a screen when we're doing a live presentation as we're getting ready to go, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. To start us off with a little bit of humor, we are trying to help families and students avoid being this old gentleman here who is finally celebrating the fact that he paid off his student loans. Maybe they weren't his student loans, maybe they were loans of a child or a grandchild. But certainly, college is a very exciting time. It's a very important time and a step in somebody's life to give them a leg up going forward into the work world. But that being said, we want to be careful that we're not resenting our choice of where we went to college because nobody explained how much we would be paying after college and for how long. So one of the big questions is, why are people that are on this webinar? Now, many of you may have been to presentations possibly at the high school where the guidance office puts on something, or they have somebody come in from a local college and talk about admissions. The bottom line is, when it comes to our kids, we want to do everything in our power to help them as much as we possibly can, but we do have to stay within the rules and avoid going to jail like some people that have been in the news lately. And whether they ultimately go to jail is a whole other question, but we want to do it the right way, and that takes time, energy, and work on the front end to be prepared. So before we get into talking about free money, scholarships, grants, financial aid, the forms, etc., one of the easiest ways to pay less for college has nothing to do with financial aid. The bottom line is one of the easiest ways to keep a family's out-of-pocket costs down is to work hard to make sure that the parents and the student feel confident that they're at the right fit school for them. We have to tune out what everybody else is doing, where everybody else is going. It's really important to make sure we find that right fit school for the student. Okay? I normally, if I'm doing a live presentation, will ask if the attendees know anybody that had a student that went off to college and ultimately ended up transferring to a different college. And the reason I bring that up is when you transfer, typically the second school is not going to accept all of the credits that were already obtained at the first school, which means that student who transfers very likely is going to have to add at least one extra semester in order to get their 4-year degree. So if the family's out-of-pocket cost is, let's say, $30,000 a year, and because of a transfer situation, we now have to add an extra semester at the new school, we just overpaid $15,000, a half a year's worth, for that 4-year degree. Now, they are kids, they're teenagers, their brains aren't even fully developed, at least the part of the brain that's used to make decisions about what they want to be and where they want to go to school. So it is a challenging thing that we're dealing with, but I want to make sure that everybody understands the importance of doing our best to try to get to the right fit school the first try and avoid that transfer and that extra money. And if you need some statistics that support the importance of what I just talked about, you can see that these statistics are pretty grim. Less than 50% graduate from the school they start at as a freshman. Barely 33% of students are achieving an undergraduate degree in 4 years, and 10% of students attend 3 or more colleges before earning a degree. Now, there are a lot of things that ultimately can explain some of these statistics. For example, yes, there are some degrees, some career paths and degrees that are requiring more than 4 years. If somebody wants to become an engineer, it's not possible to get a degree in engineering in less than 5 years. But the important thing to understand is we want to make sure that if it's a 5-year program, that we're done in 5, not 5.5 or 6. If it's a 6-year program, we want to do everything in our power to get done in 6, not 6.5 or 7. Okay? Now, a couple of key tips to remember. We want to make sure that we're determining who will find or make the time to figure things out and do what must be done. Obviously, the student should be extremely involved in this whole process. They're the ones going to college. But typically, they're going to need some help and some guidance by an adult or a parent. And the funny thing about college is, and one of the things that makes it so stressful for people is, we're already extremely busy. Very few parents have a lot of spare time on their hands. And the problem is, college is a process that happens over months, even years, especially the preparation for college. So to think that your life is going to slow down and people are going to, let you not do certain things because now you have to find the time to deal with college, it doesn't work that way. So we have to be prepared to make sure we're making the time to get things done. The other thing, if anybody on the call has somebody already in college, the one thing they will know is you can't just pick one weekend and say, okay, we're going to the library or we're going up to our home office and we're going to lock ourselves up and apply and be done with all of our admission applications in one weekend. It doesn't work that way. It happens over a period of time. And the financial aid process is fairly similar, especially if you're doing the proper preliminary planning before you even get to the point of applying for financial aid. So we can't pick one weekend. We got to be prepared for an ongoing process. The next thing is we want to make sure we understand how this saying, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, applies to college. Now, most people at some point in their life have heard the saying, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, but let's talk about how that applies to college. Personally, I've been doing this, helping families for almost 20 years with the college process. And I'm here to tell you that most families approach college almost in a completely backwards approach. And to give an analogy or an example of what I mean by this is think back to when you bought your first house. What was the process? Did you immediately start looking at $1 million plus homes? Well, if you're from a well-off family and you have a really good job, maybe you did. But for most people as young adults buying their first house, they're not starting out in $1 million homes. And there was a process that led them to determine what type of homes and where they were going to look, and that was, it boiled down to what can they afford. And the way that we determine what we could afford when it comes to buying a house is we went to the bank or we went to a mortgage broker and we said, okay, what kind of a mortgage can I qualify for? And once we know what kind of a mortgage we can qualify for, we look at what we have set aside as a down payment, and we put those two numbers together and we have an idea of how much house we can afford, and then we go looking. And of course, the obvious things, school districts and neighborhoods and all of that good stuff is important. But we need to start with the most important thing is let's not waste time looking at really beautiful, expensive houses if we can't afford them. All right? So when it comes to college, again, a lot of people get so wrapped up in, oh my gosh, where should they go? What should they study? Their life isn't going to turn out okay unless they go to this school or that school. All of the focus and the attention is building up the kid's resume and focusing on getting them into college, and very little time or energy is put towards understanding what's the out-of-pocket going to be to the family. And what is our maximum threshold between mom, dad, and the student? What is our maximum threshold that we can actually afford? Okay? And again, it's not just about getting them into college. Yes, that's important. But it's also about, getting them out in the right amount of time. Now, one of the big questions that we want to address is, how is a family supposed to pay for all of this expensive college stuff? And it can be summed up pretty much in this slide, at least on a basic level. And we'll attack the early, easy ones first, and that is at the bottom. The only reason why we have not go at all isn't to say don't go to college or don't get additional education beyond high school. That is important. But the reality is there are some kids out there that never were a good student, never are going to be a good student. It's not their thing. But they may be extremely talented in various ways, different ways. They may be able to take things apart and put them back together again, blindfolded 10 times before a lot of people even know what they just did. The point is we need to understand our student and realize when a different path other than going from high school to a traditional four-year college or university may make sense, whether it's a trade or a vocation or something. We want to make sure we're not trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. So let's move up the list, go to a lesser school. Now, if we were in a live presentation, I'd ask the audience, what do we mean by lesser? And I know I'm going to get two different answers at least. Sometimes I've gotten three answers. But some people will say, well, lesser school, it means it costs less, Chuck. And other people will say, well, a lesser school means it's not as good. The reality is it's not about more or less. It's about getting to the right fit school for that student, putting them on the path for what they're hoping to do after college. okay? And sometimes we get a little bit too wrapped up in the reputation of the school, thinking their life isn't going to turn out okay unless they go to a certain type of school. Well, I'd ask the audience to poll their own friends tomorrow or within the next couple of days and find out how many jobs their adult contemporaries have had in their working lifetime. And the odds are many people have had multiple jobs. And the reality is we live in a what have you done lately world. And after that first job, where you graduate from college may, there are no guarantees, but where you graduate from college may help you get that first job. We live in a what have you done lately world. And your next employer, whether you leave for a better position or you get downsized or let go or whatever, your next employer is going to be more concerned about can you do the job that they need done than where did you go to school. All right? Then we move up to scholarships. Most people want to find out about scholarships. Where's the free money? If you're taking notes, I would encourage you to write down there are two main sources of scholarships. The first source are private scholarships. These are scholarships that you go out or your student goes out and finds either by checking with the guidance office in the high school or searching online at various websites. I'll give you a couple that you can write down. Fastweb.com, FASTWEB.com, and then Scholly, SCHOLLY. There's more than those two, but those are two websites that you can search for free for scholarships, all right? And those scholarships have nothing to do with the financial aid process. You find them, you apply, and hopefully you get them, all right? So that's one source of scholarships. The other source of scholarships are academic or merit-based scholarships, typically from the colleges themselves. Now, we're going to talk about the school scholarships later, but let's stick on the first set of scholarships. You might have local organizations like the Rotary, the Elks, the Chamber of Commerce. These organizations oftentimes are giving out scholarships, okay? And when we look at all of these private scholarships out there that you can find for free if you do the searching, all right, of all the $100 billion out there that helps kids pay for college this year, only about 4% of all of the money helping to pay for college comes from these private scholarships. For anybody on the call that may have already searched for some scholarships, they would probably tell you that there are a lot of scholarships out there. Yes, that's a fact. But a lot of them are $250, $500, $750, $1,000, which means that your student is going to have to string together a whole bunch of these small scholarships to make a big dent in the college cost. We're not saying don't go after them, but we're all busy. We need to focus on where the bigger pieces of the pie and the greater bang for our effort is going to come from. All right? So about 4% of all the money comes from private scholarships. All right? The other thing about these scholarships searches is you could spend 5, 10, maybe even 15 minutes reading about a scholarship that looks good, only to find out deeper into the process that your student isn't even eligible to apply for that scholarship. So now you just lost maybe 10 minutes of your life, and you still are no closer to any money. All right? So let's move on from scholarships. Again, like I said, we'll circle back to the school scholarships a little bit later. That leaves us with borrowing and savings to help pay for college. Now, I'm willing to bet that if anybody out there already has a couple $100,000 in a college fund, odds are they're probably not on this call. The reality is most families, while they may have some money set aside for college, most families have had a lot of demands on their money as their kids are growing up. They're not cheap. So they may have some money saved, but they're also going to have to borrow to help get their kids through school. And their kids may have to borrow as well. So let's talk about borrowing for a second. One of the most important things to understand is you do not need to know how much money you're going to have to borrow before you start doing some research and some homework on the different loan options out there for college. And the time to be doing this is in the freshman-sophomore year, because the further into high school that your student progresses, the more things that will have to happen in the junior and senior year. Okay? So the last thing you want to do is sit there and wait around and dump all of the stuff that has to happen into a shorter window when you can take care of some of the things, at least some of the legwork, earlier on. And then ultimately, when it becomes more clear exactly where your kid is going and how much you will have to borrow, then you can quickly go back and review and make sure there haven't been any major changes. A lot of times I get asked the question, well, Chuck, what's the best loan? And I kind of chuckle, and I'll chuckle right now, because the answer is, if there were one best loan for everyone, life would be a whole lot simpler. There would be just one loan. But that's not the way it works. It's the same thing when people ask me, hey, Chuck, where's the best place for me to invest my money? Well, the reality is, if there was one best place for everyone to invest their money, okay, life would be a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot different. But that's not the case. Okay, so do our homework. Make sure you're not making a decision strictly on the lowest interest rate, because the various loan options out there, some may be variable rates, some may be fixed rates, and you also have to look at how many years you have to pay these loans back, because a very low interest rate may come with a shorter time period, just like a mortgage. Okay, a 10-year mortgage has a lower interest rate, but because you have fewer years to pay that mortgage off, you typically are going to have a higher monthly payment. And the bottom line is, interest rate is important, but what's more important is when you're done borrowing for all of the years for all of your kids, can you afford to make the monthly payments on the loans when it's time to make the loan payments? So in case nobody has done any research yet, we need to have the wake-up call about where the interest rate is today on the traditional educational loans. And the interest rate right now is going to be in the 7% range. Okay? So be prepared. You're not going to get bargain basement interest rates on traditional educational loans. All right? So we've covered the bottom part of this. Let's get into the savings part. And I'm going to use a little example of two families that are exactly the same. Okay? Meaning the income of the parents is the same number of family members, everybody's the same ages, everything is the same except for names and dates of birth, okay? And the reality is there is maybe one difference between the two families that I'm talking about. Over the last 15, 16, 17 years, one family has been motivated to try to be more prepared for when college time came and arrived. And another family, maybe not so much. Maybe they were taking 2-3 vacations every single year, and maybe they needed a new car every 2 to 3 or 4 years. And as a result of the way they lived their life leading up to college, maybe they weren't able to set aside any money for their kids' education. So, if we remember, the families are identical, with the exception of maybe one family has, let's keep it simple, one family has $20,000 in an account for their son or daughter, and the other family has $0. Well, when the Department of Education looks at those two families that are essentially identical, the family that did the right thing and set aside $20,000 in their daughter's account, the Department of Education is going to look at them and say, well, before you can get any help, you have to come up with $4,000 out of your pocket before you're eligible for any aid. And the other family who didn't save, they might be eligible right away. Now, that's real basic because they're not going to just look at the savings. There's a lot that goes into how is it calculated, your eligibility for aid. But let's throw everything else that would go on to the main financial aid form, which we're again going to assume is identical for both families. So now, instead of the one family having to come up with $4,000 on their own before they're eligible for help and the other one being eligible right away, when we throw everything else that goes into the mix, the one family might have to come up with $24,000 on their own before they're eligible for help. And the family that didn't do the right thing might be eligible, or they might only have to come up with $20,000 out of their pocket, and then they're eligible. So understanding if you do have savings, or if you're starting to get serious about saving now, understanding where your money is may have a significant impact on the end result when it comes time to getting financial award packages back from the colleges and identifying what your true family out-of-pocket will be. Okay, as I said earlier, scholarships. Anytime somebody's asking you for money to help you find a scholarship, which we already addressed, you can do that for free. Odds are extremely high that it is a scam. Now let's talk about financial aid for a second. And before we get too deep into it, we need to talk about some myths and some reality tied to the financial aid process. Okay? If I were doing a live workshop, I'd ask everybody in the audience, how many have been told by someone, a family friend, a coworker, neighbor, somebody told them, you make too much money, you're not going to get any aid. Or, you have a nice home, you're not going to get any help. Well, the reality is, how do they know when they're making that statement? Yes, they're trying to be helpful, but unless you show them all of your financial details, aren't they kind of making an assumption that because you have the same job at work, you're probably making the same amount of money, and because maybe they didn't get any help or their kid didn't get any help, you're not going to get any help? Or if you live next door to each other in the same town or the same neighborhood, is that how they're coming up with the statement, you're not going to get any help? The bottom line is we've helped families with an income of $200,000 qualify for need-based financial aid. Now let me be clear. This does not mean that we can help every single family with that type of income qualify for need-based aid. But rather than assume, we should learn how to make sure we understand how this will play out for ourselves, because that's all that really matters, not what other people think will be the outcome for us and for our child. All right? As far as the people that tell others that, their home is going to be one of the reasons they don't get any aid, they really don't know what they're talking about. Because if anybody has already filled out the FAFSA form, which is the key financial aid form required by the Department of Education, they know, if they've done it recently, they may remember that, other than the address of your house, they don't ask any information about your house. So if they know nothing about your house, what it's worth, what you paid for it, what you owe, if they know nothing about it because it's not asked on the form, how can a house be a reason why somebody's not going to get any need-based aid? All right? The reality is, there's a sidebar. There are some schools out there, a very small percentage of schools, that do require an additional form that we'll talk about later, and that gets into a lot more detail, and it will ask details about the house. So the house could have an impact, but at a very small percentage of the schools out there. All right? Is it an easy process? Well, we've heard the word overwhelmed or overwhelming so many times that if I had $5 every time somebody on my staff heard that word or a variation of that word, My wife would be a lot happier because I'd be taking her out to dinner more often. Okay? And a lot of times when people have commented that it's an easy process applying for financial aid, a lot of times they have no idea whether they even did it right. Yeah, they filled out a form, but whether they did it right or wrong that may have cost them aid, requiring them to pay more out of their pocket, a lot of times people don't even know. They think just filling out the form is all you got to worry about. Well, it is easy to fill out a form, right or wrong, but is it going to help you or is it going to hurt you, especially if you're making mistakes? All right? And then can the school people help you? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But we're going to get off of this slide, and we're going to move into how do they determine if you're eligible for aid? Now, the one thing, if you're taking notes, that you want to write down is there are two main sources or types of aid. On the one hand, you have need-based financial aid. Okay? Need-based aid is determined by a family's financial picture. By filling out the FAFSA form, it gives a picture of that family financially, and that leads to whether or not a family shows to have a need for aid. The other source is merit-based aid. Merit-based aid has nothing to do with the family's finances. It has everything to do with the student and all of their extracurricular activities, their test scores, their GPA, all of that good stuff. Okay? So need-based aid revolves around the family's finances. Merit-based aid revolves more around the student, who they are, what they've done, etc. All right? But let's talk about need-based aid here. How do they determine if you are eligible for need-based aid? And the formula is this, and I would encourage you to write it down if you're taking notes. First, you start with the cost of attendance. Now, this is a number that's going to change because schools cost different amounts by school. There is no flat cost for every school in the country. All right? That will be a moving number from school to school. But what will be a constant number in the formula is your expected family contribution. And that expected family contribution is a number that is calculated after a family fills out the FAFSA form, which is the Federal Financial Aid Form. So, the cost of the school, which is not just tuition, it includes room and board and books. Cost of attendance minus your family contribution equals your need. If a school has a sticker price of $40,000 and the family contribution is $40,000, 40 minus 40 equals 0. That family shows 0 need. They will not get any need-based aid. The student may still be able to get merit-based aid, but they're not showing need. Now, what if the school costs 40 and the family contribution is 20? Well, 40 minus 20 equals 20. We have a need of $20,000. But if you're writing this formula down, somewhere near the word need, please write eligible for ? Just because a family shows a need does not mean that they get to come to one of our offices and say, hey, Chuck, look, I have a need of $20,000. Are you going to give that to me, or where do I get that? It doesn't work that way. It also means you don't get to go to the financial aid office at the colleges that your son or daughter is applying to and say, look, I have a need of $20,000. When do you give that to me? Your need is what you are eligible for, not a guarantee of what you are going to get. But obviously, the greater the need, the better the potential that a family is going to get more help. All right, so cost of attendance minus family contribution, which is constant, equals the need. All right. Now, it would be helpful to find out what this looks like at a lot of the schools that your son or daughter might be considering, but much earlier on than when many families find out about this. All right. And you'll see what I mean by that as we get a little bit further into this. But before we get too far down to that, let's talk about the different sources of money. Where are we getting the money? Where does it come from? Okay, and again, we're still on need-based financial aid. Well, first, the federal government is one source of aid. But let's make this real simple and sweet and short. What kind of financial condition is the federal government in? If they're not broke, they're pretty close to it, which means we cannot be expecting a lot of free money coming from the federal government. They'll lend you all the money in the world, practically, to send your kid to college, but there's not a lot of free money. So what you're looking at here, the top two things, the Pell Grant and the CEOG grants, those are grants that are only going to go to the very most needy families. These are families that have an expected family contribution of 0 or slightly more than 0. So not going to apply for most families. Then we get down to work study. Okay, this is a part-time job, maybe stuffing envelopes in the athletic office at the college throughout the year. This is not a bad thing, but you need to understand the colleges have to find work hours for a lot of kids. So if you get a financial award package from a college and they're suggesting that your kid is going to get $3,000 in work study, odds are they can't find the hours for your kid to earn $3,000 that year based on what they get paid. So a more realistic number might be about $1,000 to maybe $1,500 in work study. Every little bit helps, and you know what? It's not a lot of hours. It's not hard work. Half the time they're getting paid for 2 hours in the afternoon, and they might get everything that they need to get done in 1 hour, which means they've got an hour somewhere quiet to do their schoolwork, and they're getting paid for it. All right? Also, if you think, I don't want them working, they're there to study, and a job would be a distraction, there are plenty of studies that have proven or show that the less free time students have on their hands when they get to college, the better they do. All right? And I'm not bragging because it was only Division III, but I'm proof of this statistic. In college, I played soccer, which back then, for the most part, the obligation was in the fall. A little bit of stuff during the winter and spring, but for the most part, it was a one-season sport. Okay? So in the fall, 3 out of the 4 years at college, my grades were better in the fall when I was forced to manage my time because of the sport than when I had a little bit more free time on my hands in the spring. All right? Going down the list, we've got subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans. These are federal student loans that the student can get without any involvement of a parent. However, there is a cap or a maximum that they're able to get in these loans. All right? And if they maximize their direct Stafford student loans, over 4 years, the most they can graduate with in that type of loan is $27,000. So it's not a whole lot, but it certainly will help. Maybe it'll pay for 1 year of college. But the bottom line is it's not an overbearing amount for the student to have. Unless they're only working 1 day a week, a summer job would probably pay somebody enough to make the payments on those loans. Okay? And then we get down to, So you see here subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans. They're basically federal loans, pretty much the same thing. The only difference is on the subsidized version, the federal government is, depending on how you want to look at it, they're waiving the interest while the student is in college, and after they graduate, the interest starts, or you can consider it the government is paying the interest for you while they are in college, but after they graduate, the interest starts. The unsubsidized interest starts from day one. Okay? The last line is the Parent Plus loan, which again is a federal loan, but in this case, the parent is the one taking the loan. It is in the parent's name, parent's responsibility. They're taking that loan to help their kid get through college. There are other loan options out there, which is why I said earlier, in the freshman and sophomore year is when you should be doing your research on the different loan options so that you're better prepared when it actually comes time to make a decision on which ones make the most sense for you. Now, before we get off the loans too much, I want to stress that I strongly believe that every student needs some skin in the game in college. And I think every student should go off to college at the minimum, at least thinking they're responsible for that $27,000 over 4 years of Stafford loans. Okay? Because if the students go off to college and they don't have any skin in the game, this might become the student. Okay? The difference is if mom and dad tell the student, hey, listen, whether you graduate or not, you're going to be responsible for paying back certain loans. That's on you. They're going to be a little bit more serious about making sure that they get done in the right number of years so that they're not borrowing any more than necessary. Okay? And if you want to and are able to pay those loans off after they've done the right thing and graduated in the right number of years, nobody cares who writes the check. So as long as you can pay off those loans for them as a graduation present and still graduate how and when you want to how and when you want to retire as the parents, knock yourself out. You can pay those loans off for the student after they've shown that they did what they were there to do. Other sources of money, state. Well, we're in New Jersey, at least I think everybody in this call is in New Jersey. And the bottom line is New Jersey is no better off financially than the federal government. So we can't expect any free money coming from the state of New Jersey to help most kids go to college. Most states do have their own loan program or loan option. New Jersey's is the NJ class or New Jersey class loan. I'm not telling you about that because I think it's the best. It's just one more of the loan options you need to research to figure out what makes the most sense for your family. Okay? And then we get down to the colleges and the universities. Now, if you remember earlier, when we talked about the private scholarships that you go find on your own, they only represent about 4% of the money. Well, of all the money out there to help pay for college, about 20% is going to come directly from the colleges. Okay? Private colleges tend to have larger endowments, and they are able to bring their higher sticker price down to a more affordable, real out-of-pocket number for many families. Now, this is the school's money, so they get to decide who gets it, how they're going to give it out, etc. But oftentimes, college money is given out on a first-come, first-served basis. So where do you need to be in line? Near the front of it. You cannot procrastinate with this process because a college, if they determine late in the game that your student would have been eligible for some of their money, but they already gave money out to the Smith family, they're not going to ask for it back to give it to your kid. All right? The other thing to understand is the colleges will often give preferential packages to the students who they feel are in the top 20% of the applicants. Not top 20% in their high school. These are the kids that are in the top 20% of all of the kids that they've accepted to go there. Okay? Now, some of you might be wondering, well, Chuck, how do we figure out whether our kid is in the top 20% at a school? And, you know, the bottom line is there are a lot of things in life that either don't make sense or don't seem very fair. And this is another one of those examples. Okay? Oftentimes, the colleges, because there's a relatively short window of time for everything to play out from beginning to end, there's a relatively short amount of time, and oftentimes the colleges may have to look at the SAT score or the ACT score to narrow down the group of kids that they're going to give their money to. which means you could be like myself. I worked hard, I got good grades, I had a good GPA, but I didn't test all that well on the standardized testing. Okay, I actually had a form of dyslexia, and I was just slow getting through it. The bottom line is, it may not seem fair, it may not make sense, but you could have a straight A student who just doesn't test well kind of get thrown out with the bathwater and not be considered in the top 20%. They're good enough to be accepted to go to that school, but they may not be good enough to make the cut to get that school's money. All right? And understand, there are a lot of schools out there that may tell you they are test blind, meaning they're not going to look at the standardized test for admission. They'll judge your student as to whether or not they're going to accept you to go there on their GPA, their course load, their extracurricular, their volunteers, all of that other stuff. They may not look at the test scores for admission. But because of timing and necessity, they need a quick, down and dirty way to go from a whole bunch of kids that they're looking at for their money to a much smaller, more manageable number of kids. So we're back to the private sources and the private scholarships, which is what I started out with earlier, where 4% of all the money out there comes from those private scholarships, all right? But about 20% is going to be coming from the colleges and universities themselves. The other thing to keep in mind is, although federal or state schools, public or state schools, appear to be less expensive, they have a lower sticker price, you need to understand that they rely more heavily on federal and state money. And we already established earlier on that the federal government and the states, most of them, are close to broke or broke. So there's not going to be a lot of money to bring that already lower sticker price down even further. On the flip side, you could have a private school that starts out with a much higher sticker price, and you'll see an example in a little bit, but ultimately in the end, the out-of-pocket to the family may be very close, in some cases even less than that state school. So we'll get to that example in a bit. So how do you apply for aid? There are some forms that have to be filled out. Without question, every family should be filling out the FAFSA form, F-A-F-S-A. Do not worry about what it stands for. Everybody refers to it as the FAFSA. And if you mispronounce it, most people know what you're talking about, okay? But if you really must know, it's the free application for federal student aid. Everybody, even if you are 100% certain in your mind you're not going to be eligible for any need-based aid, if you want your kid to have at least the opportunity to accept or decline those federal Stafford loans that I talked about, they will not be offered those loans unless you fill out the FAFSA form. All right? And then you'll remember that I said there is a small percentage of schools out there that do ask about the home. They're going to ask for, in addition to the FAFSA form, they're going to ask for the CSS profile form or financial aid profile form. And that form is going to ask the same information as the FAFSA and a whole lot more. Okay? And, by the way, you have to pay a small amount to register to even get the form to fill it out or get access to it to fill it out online. And then you have to pay another small amount for every school that requires the profile form. In addition to the FAFSA, which everybody should do regardless of school, and maybe the profile, some schools have their own institutional financial aid form, and that will be asking a lot of the same information as the FAFSA form. So the question becomes, why do some schools need multiple forms asking a lot of the same information more than once? And other than they're looking for consistency and they're maybe looking for the people that aren't being fully disclosing. So consistency might be one thing, but quite honestly, I believe a big part of it is they are hoping that some families will get frustrated and after they've filled out one form say, I already provided this information, I'm not doing it again. Well, guess what? If you want access to their money to help your kid pay for college, and they want you to fill out a different form or an additional form, you better do it, or they have no reason that they have to give you any of their money. If you own a business or you're divorced or separated, it may be yet another form. And while we're on the topic of the forms, this may be a little bit hard to read, but this tells us how parents really feel about the FAFSA form. A few years ago, when our older kids were going to college, one of my wife's college friends, who also had kids that were getting ready to go to college, sent this in a text to my wife. And in case you cannot read it, up at the top, you can read that it's basically a file folder. You can read on the left the letter F, and then some whiteout, and then FAFSA. I wonder what was whited out. And then down at the bottom, her friend said, Doug's filing system. I'm sensing frustration and anger. So the bottom line is, you have to do the FAFSA form. I'm all about managing expectations. I want you to expect that it's not going to be a fun process. Okay? Now, we've got a big question to think about. How do they determine, or how do you determine, which of the schools your student is interested in are going to give you the best shot at getting aid? And we have to understand how this works. We need to know how to determine, well, if I show a need at a school, what percentage of a family's need does that school typically help with? Do they cover 100% of the need, or do they only cover 50% of the need? Of the aid that they help or provide, how much of it is gift aid or free money, scholarships and grants that don't have to be paid back, versus loans that do have to be paid back? All right? So every school is going to be a little bit different in terms of how they go about helping and how much help they provide to the family that shows a financial need. To do things the best way possible, it would be extremely important for families to understand how to figure this stuff out, which all boils down to what is your actual family out-of-pocket going to be at that school, and can we afford it? Before we take a day off of work or a couple of days off of work, put gas in the car or get on a plane, pay for hotel rooms, meals, etc., to go visit these schools, maybe we should have some sense of whether or not it's going to be an affordable school in the first place. Who wants to spend the money, take their kid to look at schools, have them fall in love with a couple of schools, and then because we don't know what we're doing, later on find out, oh my gosh, we can't afford this school. We still have one or two more kids after this one to get through college. Who wants to have that conversation with an emotional teenager who just fell in love with a school, and now you're figuring out at the 11th hour that's probably not an option? Not a fun conversation. So here is a case study. This is going to start tying all of this together. We've got School A on the left that has a sticker price, cost of attendance of $60,000. School B, their sticker price is only $30,000, half the money. Is it? Well, remember what I said earlier. Your family contribution, which is determined after you fill out the FAFSA form, that is a constant, regardless of the schools. All right? So you can see that School A, the family has a much greater need than the need at School B. All right? And you can also, as you look down in the middle, School A typically helps with 100% of a family's need, and of that aid that they give, 80% of it is going to be free money that doesn't have to be paid back. The other 20% might be work study and loans. Look over to the right to School B. They only meet about 60% of the schools or of the family's need, which means there's a shortfall already. And of the aid that they do give, half of it's free money and half of it's loans. Well, what did the family actually pay at each school? The bottom line, for the sake of time, if we go down to this bottom paragraph, the family pays $2,000 less out of their pocket to send their child to the more, quote, quote, more expensive school. Don't make the huge mistake of picking schools based strictly on the sticker price. You need to learn how to boil it down to your actual out-of-pocket cost before you cross a school that might be an exceptional fit for your student, before you cross it off the list. Now, you fill out the financial aid forms. You've applied to get in, obviously, and now you're filling out the financial aid forms to see how much aid you might get. Well, we need to understand that after you fill out and apply for the aid, you get a financial award package back from the colleges. And it tells you what type of aid your student got and what your out-of-pocket will be. All right? We need to remember something very important about college. Colleges are in the business of education. And the word that I emphasized was business. Okay? Extremely, extremely important. The main goal of every college is to fill every classroom seat and every dorm bed that they have capacity to fill and give out as little of their own money as they possibly have to give out to get what they want, which is full enrollment. Okay? So, when schools give out their initial award packages to everybody, some of them may intentionally hold back on some money. Because if there are enough families that say, well, we were really hoping we would get more help, but Johnny really wants to go there, so we'll have to make it work, guess what? If that school can fill every classroom seat and every dorm bed that they have capacity to fill, and give out $100,000 less than they anticipated they might have to give out to get to full enrollment, that school is doing the happy dance. Because now, instead of waiting a year, they can start redoing the landscaping at the main entrance of campus, which is the first impression most families are going to get when they drive up there next year to consider the school for their child. Okay? So we need to understand that your original award could be under-awarded. There could be a mistake. Okay? So there is the possibility to appeal the original award package. But here's the thing. You can't just go back to the school or the financial aid office at the school and say, in a whiny voice, we really want to come here, but we need more money. Because those poor people are hearing begging from families all the time. And the last thing they want to hear is another family begging for more money. So you have to be prepared. You have to be armed with your case and your information to be able to speak intelligently so that they are going to understand you are not the average family. You are informed. You did your homework. And you're speaking to them in a way that they understand they can't just brush you off. Now they have to deal with you. That doesn't guarantee you're going to get more, but if you know what you're doing, the anticipation of getting something more should be pretty high. Okay? How to appeal an award. This is an example of an original offer on the left and an adjusted offer on the right. Okay? And you can see here, for the sake of time, I'm going to try to summarize, but you can see here on the left, there's a yellow number down at the bottom. That's $4,500 of the family's need that out of the gate the family didn't address. So that immediately got added to the family's out-of-pocket cost. All right? If you look to the right, after an appeal, the university grant went up from $2,000 to $4,000. There's a brand new scholar award of $1,000 that was not there in the first place, okay? And then we go down the line, but the bottom line is just between those top two, there's an additional $3,000 of free money. And if that holds true for all 4 years of college, that appeal was successful in getting potentially another $12,000 knocked off of the family's out-of-pocket, and therefore likely a reduction in what the family, student, and parents might have to borrow. Okay? And now the yellow number on the right is a 0. So the school came back and helped with 100% of the family's need. So, how do you get more need-based aid for college? Well, again, it's important to understand what goes on the financial aid form, how is all of that information taken into consideration and weighted, and understanding that just like at tax time, which we're in the midst of tax time, many people will pay a tax professional, a CPA or an accountant, to do their taxes for them. Why? Because that's their profession. They spend all of their time reading the tax code and going to seminars and lectures to make sure that they can get their clients every deduction and every credit that they can legally and ethically take within the loopholes of the tax code, so that their clients, you, pay less in taxes. You're still going to pay your fair share, but you shouldn't be paying any more than it is absolutely necessary. Well, the same holds true with college and financial aid. There are some loopholes, and where you have your assets and the way you look on that financial aid form could make the difference of a few $1,000s times a few years of college, maybe multiple years if you've got more than one child, where it could add up to a decent amount. Okay? So, understanding how things play out when you go through this process puts you in a better position to maximize your opportunities and reduce your ultimate out-of-pocket for college. And I talked about the loopholes, okay? Here's the thing with college. If you've ever flown on an airplane and you bought the ticket, everybody knows that if you're in coach or economy, the person sitting right next to you, unless they're traveling with you, the person sitting next to you or near you, they're taking off from the same airport and they're landing in the same airport. They're getting the same peanuts and everything else that you're getting. But odds are pretty good they didn't pay the same price you paid to do the same thing. They may have paid more than you. They may have paid less than you. College is very similar to that. What families pay to go to schools can be very different because of the way this is set up to work. So, a huge help to any family is understanding how this works so that they can get a read early as possible. How far below the sticker price will we actually be? All right. This is an example of two families. One took control, the other one didn't. The bottom line is this is another example similar to the one I gave towards the very beginning of one family did the right thing. They lived the right way and set aside some money for college, knowing that their kid was going to go to college. The other family lived life and never thought about setting any money away for college. And the reality is one family who is in the know is going to come out better because there may be ways to legally and ethically address that $20,000 in the example I gave earlier, so that the family that did the right thing is going to end up looking just like the family that didn't do the right thing. So, a couple of things to wrap up with. We want to make sure that we're helping families manage their expectations. Okay? First of all, not every school wants a bunch of valedictorians, because odds are, if a campus was made up of 100% valedictorians, there wouldn't be enough kids that have the interest and the aptitude to play on the sports teams, or be in the band, or the music program, or the art program. All right? So colleges are building communities. You have to be careful you're not going overboard with the pressure and forcing your kid to become a serial joiner, where they're signing up for every single activity and club they possibly can. The admissions offices have people, they're not stupid. They understand how many hours in a day these high school kids have. Therefore, they understand how many hours might be available to actually participate in the gazillion things that they put on their resume with their application. Be careful not to overdo it. Less can be more. Doing one thing where you are the leader, the captain, or you're a founding member of something brand new shows leadership, initiative. That's going to weigh much more heavily in somebody's decision than a kid that has a laundry list of things that is impossible to be majorly active in all of those things. So always ask yourself, where is the value before you start trying to do things that you think are going to help your kid. All right? Things like getting an invitation to a leadership program in Washington, D.C. Well, why did you get that piece of mail? Why is your kid singled out and invited to this program? Here's why. They looked at your zip code and they knew you would probably pay a small fee, fill out a form, and now your kid gets to go if they have room and you don't procrastinate. Now, that may still be a very good thing to do because it could end up being a college admission essay topic, but the reality is, if you think that sending your kid to the leadership program in Washington, D.C. is the magic golden ticket to get into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, i.e. every college they want to go to, that's not logical thinking. It's not realistic thinking. It can help, but you got to really understand where is the value. So wrapping up, who can help you? Well, high school guidance, they get a bad rap a lot of times. And here's why. Because the national average is about 300 plus students per one guidance counselor throughout the country. That's an awful lot of students and families to try to help out and take care of in a relatively limited amount of time that the guidance offices have. They're not staffed with a gazillion guidance officers. They're running lean because of school budgets, so it's not their fault. They just don't have the time to give all of the people under their watch the type of attention that may be demanded or desired. All right? And the other school people that we would talk about is the financial aid offices at the colleges. They're not going to tell you how to set yourself up financially before you apply for aid so that you're then going to show a greater need for them to give you more money. Okay? They may tell you, yes, these are the forms you have to fill out. These are the deadlines. Get them in if you want aid. But they're not going to do everything for you. If someone says they can help you with the college process, here are a couple of key questions you may want to ask of them. All right, I'll let you read those. So, what are your options now that we've completed this workshop or program? Well, you've got a couple of options. You can take what you've learned tonight and go forward and not let 2 weeks or a few months go by before you think about college again. Take what you've learned tonight and build on the momentum that this webinar was meant to provide to you, okay? Do what you can now because you're going to have less time to cram it all in if you don't stay on top of it, okay? Or you can let us know, okay, that you might want to talk to us again. You do not have to ever talk to us ever again. I can go home and sleep tonight because I know from doing a lot of these, everybody got something out of this. I helped you in some way, all right, even if we never speak again, all right? But if you want, we would send you an evaluation form and encourage you to give us feedback. We want to hear what you thought about this program so we can improve upon it, all right? And you will have an opportunity in that to tell us whether you would want a consultation with us or an evaluation where we would do a couple of things for you. Based on what we covered tonight, we did a lot in a short amount of time very fast. But if you're sitting there thinking it would be very helpful to know what my expected family contribution would be within a couple of weeks of this webinar, then we will calculate that for you as part of a one-on-one evaluation process that lasts about an hour, okay? If you think it would be extremely helpful to have an idea of what your out-of-pocket costs might be for your student and your family at a couple of schools that may be of interest, and if you don't know any schools are of interest because your kid's too young, we'll pick a couple just so that you understand how this works. We want to take what we covered in a generic level for everyone tonight and boil it down further to your specific family circumstances so it means that much more to you, okay? We're not going to chase you. You obviously signed up for this. We can email you our evaluation form. You can email us and tell us if you would like to take advantage of that follow-up session, all right? With that, I'm going to conclude the webinar. I'm going to thank everybody for being on the call. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask if you want, you can certainly email some questions if we didn't answer something. And what we can try to do is compile a list of answers to those questions and send them out to everybody that registered and provided an email address for us to be able to do that. So again, thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight. We really appreciate your being on with us, and we hope that you got a lot out of it. We wish you luck, regardless of whether we ever speak to you again, and have a great night. Good luck.